One name I want to focus in on, he's new on your list. He ranks just below those two. It's a defenseman, Carson Soucek, out in Seattle, a hard-nosed defenseman. You see here the picture of him blocking an Alex Ovechkin one-timer, a guy who puts his body on the line, and he strikes me as that prototypical playoff-style D-man that a lot of contenders would like to get their hands on. He's got a year left on his deal after this. Is he a likely name that could move, or could Seattle maybe want to hold on to this guy?
Yeah, I could see Seattle keeping him, but I know he's a player that a lot of teams have interest in. And I think the best way to describe where the Kraken are at as it approaches the deadline is, aside from maybe Jared McCann, probably Yanni Gourde, the Seattle Kraken aren't really married to anyone else. That's the most fair way to describe it. And so I think Soucek fits in that category. You'd have to come along and make an interesting offer in order to pry him loose. But with that size and the way that he plays the game, I think he's a prime target for teams in terms of trying to add a piece like that to your blue line. So, that's a name that has popped up in recent days and weeks. And to say, again, that he's on the board, no guarantee to move, but he's someone that's been floated out there. And I think the Kraken are in this spot where they'd have to consider just about anything that comes down the pike.
Another name that caught my attention is a guy who hasn't appeared in an NHL game yet, and that's 22-year-old unsigned prospect Jack McBain with the Minnesota Wild. How much interest in there is there in McBain? And also explain maybe the difference between if the Wild were to move him before the deadline or potentially after the deadline.
Yeah, look, there's no rush to move Jack McBain, although I think in a perfect world, the Wild would be able to accomplish that before the March 21st deadline. And the team that would get him would probably like to have him in their arsenal and on their reserve list so they could use him if need be in the Stanley Cup playoffs. But this is a guy who's in his fourth year of school and is close to obtaining UFA status. If he waits until August 15th to sign, there's no pressure to sign. He's a Wild draft pick from a previous regime. And so they're going to trade him at some point. Like I said, you could trade him after the deadline. There's no stopping that. He just wouldn't be eligible for the playoffs. But he's someone that I think the Wild ideally would like to get a second round pick for. And another reason to potentially do it before the trade deadline is you could then take that second round pick if you'd want and flip it to get something else that may be able to help you in the near term. I think McBain is one of those guys that's knocking on the door in terms of being NHL ready. You see him for Team Canada here, participated in the Olympics. Someone that's pretty close to that range in terms of being a contributor in the NHL, and the ask is a second round pick.
It's an interesting situation there, and another couple of players who are in kind of an interesting scenario. It's two players on the cusp of being in that Group 6 UFA range. We're going to touch on two, but first, Rem Pitlick, 12 goals in 44 games since the Montreal Canadiens claimed him on waivers. What's the deal with Pitlick?
Yeah, it's fascinating, actually, Group 6 free agents in general. And there have been a couple in recent years that have made significant impacts. Michael Bunting is one now with the Toronto Maple Leafs. He obtained Group 6 free agent status last year, just played in 21 games with the Arizona Coyotes and scored 10 goals, ends up on the Leafs radar. Carson Soucek was a guy 2 years ago, Group 6 free agent, had a breakout season with the Minnesota Wild, and then was trending towards Group 6 and could ultimately hit it. And the Wild re-signed him a few days before free agency opened to a 3-year, $2.75 million contract, which he's still on right now with the Seattle Kraken after getting claimed. And Pitlick has sort of been nothing short of a revelation to this point this season. This is a guy that's been waived twice in his career. You see the games played requirements, 74 games that are needed. He's played in 55. So the Canadiens have 22 games left. He needs to play in 19 of those 22 in order for the Habs to retain his rights. And he would then convert back to RFA status. It seems like that's going to happen given his productivity, playing in the top six for Montreal, playing more than 16 minutes a night. And the production has been there, 27 points, 12 goals. The Canadiens would like to re-sign this guy and keep him. And I think there's probably some mutual love there coming back from Pitlick, as he's now a guy that seems like he's found a home after being waived twice, first in Nashville, then in Minnesota.
Another name who's in this group or in this conversation is Sharks defenseman Jacob Middleton. Does this Group 6 status that's lingering, does it affect his trade value?
Well, it does in the sense that there is some risk here for a team that would trade for Jacob Middleton. And the risk is, as you see, he needs to play in 18 of the last 23 games remaining this season for the San Jose Sharks. Who knows how a trade would affect the schedule in terms of, let's say you get traded and your team's playing that night, all of a sudden the margin is a little bit thinner. What happens if he goes to a team on the other side of the border and you have to wait for a visa? That's another thing. And on top of that, what happens if the player ends up getting hurt? The asking price is significant for the San Jose Sharks. They're looking for a second-round pick, reportedly, plus another pick for Jacob Middleton, a guy that stepped in and has played north of 21 minutes a night after a long career with the San Jose Barracuda in the AHL. He's sort of come out of the clear blue sky. And what if he were to get hurt? You've now spent significant assets to get Jacob Middleton, and he could then, if he doesn't meet the games played threshold, then walk to unrestricted free agency in the summer. Again, probably low on the risk scale, but just something to keep in mind, as other teams have mentioned, as they consider players like Middleton. Pitlick likely to stay in Montreal, as we mentioned, and I'll have a few other Group 6 free agents to watch later today on dailyfaceoff.com.